documentation or the scientific evidence remains uncertain. They say that EMF, magnetic fields, are a possible cancerogenic and might contribute to an increase in childhood leukemia. So they are saying that from their statistical analysis and from the review at the moment that there is some type of a link that they cannot rule out. They cannot rule it out. There's also the whole issue of mental health, which is a major problem in this country. And you're going to, sorry, not you, but if this project goes ahead, it's potentially going to put thousands, maybe tens of thousands of homes, families and people into serious negative equity issues, of which I'm sure the banks will rub their hands and look on with interest as to how they're going to get their money back. How is that being addressed? How is the mental health effect of this project being addressed? All of the issues regarding health are outlined as being inconclusive. So what does inconclusive mean? Inconclusive means that no one actually can definitively say that it doesn't cause a problem, because the evidence, the statistical evidence would suggest that there is a link of some description, but science just hasn't caught up yet. It's like asbestos and passive smoking. Science just hasn't caught up, but science will catch up, and when it does, will we all regret it? So again, I come back to the issue of mental health and negative equity and all of that issues and how that's going to affect lots of people in society. When the airgrid project that was coming into Rush was on the forum a few years ago, our own Minister for Health at that stage in March 2012 wrote, I believe, to Minister Rabbitte, and I believe all the members here have a copy of that correspondence, outlining his concerns regarding the health issues of that particular project. Now, if our own Minister for Health has concerns, why is the government allowing these projects to go ahead in the manner in which they are?
Okay. Deputy London is next. So if you want to.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm one of the few deputies here that's not from an area that's affected by this, but I wanted to be here because while we mightn't be affected by the current proposals, there's no doubt about it at some stage in the future, because of the topography of the area that I represent is an area that will be probably identified for future development of wind farms. And to be fair to you, I don't think what you came here for was flippant easy answers or, you know, kind of throwaway comments that all of your problems are going to go away. And I think that that would be totally disingenuous to you. And I think, you know, anybody that would engage in that is not doing, I think, the committee any service, and certainly not doing the hearings any service. But I suppose where I would like to ask you to maybe comment is in relation to one of the things I think Deputy Coffey mentioned, it was in relation to the grid existing line between Moneypoint and County Kildare. And I think there's a body of work that needs to be done really by this committee. You know, the consultation obviously hasn't happened with yourselves, and that's something I think we have to take that up with Airgrid. But I also think that this committee needs to talk to the likes of Clare County Council and North Tipperary County Council to look to see, you know, since that line went in the 70s or early 80s, you know, how much development has taken place in the proximity of it, you know, how many houses have been built. I think we need to talk to the RPII, we need to talk to the National Cancer Registry, because they should be able to superimpose on a map of the grid the people who have been registered with cancers and things like that. And I think we need to do a proper analysis, because what we really need is actual information. And I really respect the fact that you're coming from an area where you're not getting information, you're not getting engagement, and there is a vacuum, and fear comes into that vacuum. I also think that we need to try and debunk as well to some degree some of the suggestions that are out there that the grid isn't needed, and we need to talk to the likes of the IDA and find out from them what do they actually require in these regions, in the northwest, in the northeast, in the southeast, and in the west, which is going to fast be coming on after everybody else, to see is there a requirement, because there's no point in again, as I said, the flippant throwaway remark saying these things aren't needed. If they are needed, let's find out why are they needed, what would they support in terms of jobs in the future, in the southeast, in the northeast, in the west and things like that? And is there a way of bringing them that accommodates the local community who were there ever before them? And I also think that the committee needs to engage with Éireann O'Dearden and the National Roads Authority. Purely from the point of view, Chairman, and I'm trying to be constructive again, I'm not from a constituency, and it would be easy for me to grandstand here today to say bury them. I do think that there needs to be proper engagement with the other infrastructural owners in the state to see if they will accommodate them. There's no point in us saying put them under a motorway if the NRA come on after and say we don't want them for X, Y and Z reasons. And I also think that we need to look at the railway infrastructure. They already have the broadband cable running down through the middle of the country. Even on the old disused railway lines, the broadband line is used. And the questions that I just want to ask is, in your respective areas, have you looked with your county councils in respect of tourism projects that could possibly be impacted on this? And as well, I know that there was mention made a while ago, in relation to property devaluation. Has EirGrid, especially the Monaghan people, has EirGrid offered any concrete, definitive level of compensation to you? And where do the I suppose the farming organisations stand in relation to this in terms of, are they accommodating the farmers? Are they representing the farmers? Are they trying to get the best deal possible for the farmers? Because obviously there is a compensatory element to this as well. So I think, Chairman, I would like to see this just being the start of a process, and I don't think that, to be fair to the groups here today, that there's going to be any solutions here today. But I would like to see, some of the agencies that haven't even been mentioned brought in and asked, statistically, can you tell me, are you at a higher risk living in approximate nature to the 220 kV line that runs from Moneypoint to County Kildare? Are you at a higher than average national risk of contracting a cancer than you are, say, if you live down in West Cork? And I think we need to put some of that information out there. But I also think that we really, really need to get to the bottom of the line in terms of the cost-benefit analysis. An actual independent study, how much would this thing cost to take it an alternative route, and how much does it cost to take the existing route? Because there is a suggestion that, electricity falls off. The one final remark that I would make, I went through all of this with wind turbines, with power grids, and with mobile phone masts before when I was a councillor. The easy thing now is, once routes are selected, is that 3/4 of the organisation falls off because it's no longer our problem. And I would really try and encourage you that even if you're not selected for a route that goes through your particular area, whether it's the southeast or the northeast or wherever, that just because it's not in your parish, that you walk away from it when everybody else is left with the baby, and there's 1 in 4 people going to be wound up with it. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, any comments?
Just very briefly, Deputy Lord Donovan, I think to deal very briefly into the point with what you said, EirGrid have never offered any compensation of any kind to any landowner in County Monaghan over the period of the last 6 years. They've been pushed on it. They said they don't have a national agreement in place. They're attempting to negotiate a national agreement with the farm organisations. As regards farm organisations, I think it is the policy of the ICMSA that the line should be put on the ground. We know that the IFA is the biggest national farm organisation in the country. We have met with them on a number of occasions at very senior level. Their stance has always been that they don't get involved at this stage, but if the project gets planning permission, they would then get involved in representing farmers from the point of view of compensation, which I have made quite clear to them. I feel that they're letting landowners down by not being involved at this stage. Yet last Thursday night, I think we're all aware that there is an election on for national president of the IFA at the minute. Both candidates last Thursday night at a regional meeting up there part of the way said that both of them wanted to see the lines on the ground. And they said that as of from last Thursday, it was now IFA policy that the lines would be put on the ground. We'll wait and see if that is the case. But if they stated that publicly, and if that is the case, then the farm organisation should be involved at this stage. That's trying to clarify those two issues here.
Ms Murphy.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation here today, and I apologise for being late. I was actually caught up in traffic.
Yeah, I stated that before.
Yeah. Okay. I've been listening to what people have been saying, and I'd like to address just a couple of points, in particular some points that were made by Deputy Jonathan. First of all, with tourism, and I can just speak for my own local area, in relation to tourism, my feeling is that what's going to happen is that we're going to have one department spending budgets and promoting tourism, and then we're going to have another department spending budgets and decimating our tourism industry in this country. In our own local area, I'm from Oireachtas, we've had €2 million spent just in the last couple of years upgrading the town, and we've had €1.2 million spent on the Kennedy Homestead. Over the years, we've had €20 million invested in tourism locally, and in actual fact, one of the corridors is going as close as 500 metres to the outskirts of the town, and it is a town that is largely dependent on tourism, and the full hinterland of Oireachtas is dependent on tourism, and I don't think Oireachtas have given any thought to that, or whoever picked the corridor certainly didn't give any thought to that. The second point that I'd like to bring up is about the visual impact of the pylons on the countryside. Every county has their development plans in place, and the development plans are the blueprint, and they set out the guidelines and the objectives for the development and the proper planning in the area. But what it seems to me, and I'm quite disturbed at Oireachtas' blatant disregard of the importance of the sensitivity of the landscape that's set out into development plans. And I'll give you an example that just in our hinterland, on one of the corridors actually runs straight through and transverses two landscapes of greater sensitivity as set out by our county development plan, and there are two landscapes of greater sensitivity adjacent to a corridor in our area. So also we have SACs and proposed NHAs. For example, we have Palmounty, which is the border between Wexford and Carlow. It is a glacial valley and an area steeped in history, and I feel that for to have pylons traverse this area would be an absolute appalling sight and would devastate the tourism in that area. And I feel that as well the inhabitants of the landscape, as was pointed out earlier, our community were invited to submit our viewpoints on the development of our county development plans. We had a draft county development plan, then we had an amended draft of the county development plan. All of this has been in place, and Oireachtas, as far as I can see, have scant regard for our county development plans and for our beautiful countryside that's going to be absolutely ruined, and in turn our tourism industry is going to be ruined by this project. So I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I, sorry? Oh yes, sorry, before I go to, I'll go to Deputy McEntee and Deputy Ellis first, then Deputy McEntee and Senator Landy, and then I have other members. But before that, Deputy Healy wanted to come in, but I understand you have to leave, Deputy Healy. So if you want to,
just to apologise to our guest, I'm due to speak on leaders' questions in the Dáil chamber shortly, and I just wanted to apologise that I have to leave. I did raise this issue at leaders' questions last week, including the question of suspending the project, and I will be available to support the groups into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So could I now move to Deputy Ellis?
Thanks very much, Arlo. I'd like to thank all the groups for their input there, and I think it was a very, very worthwhile exercise to listen to everyone. I represent Dublin North West, where we've in the past been dealing with mobile phone masts, and over the years rules have been laid down in regards to those and proximity to schools, etc. I've also been dealing with individual cases of pylons through estates and other areas, and in some cases where there was arcing and noise from these pylons, and many of them have been heard and some of them have been undergrounded. So there is concerns even in an area that's not affected in the same way it is with yourselves. But I think the big issues for us all here is health and safety, the visual impact and the impact on our communities. And when I was listening to people there, one of the thoughts, was the cost of this project. We don't seem to have the cost of the project in its entirety, including the purchase of land, and also in terms of putting it underground, and the long-term effects of maintenance, whether it's overground or underground, the long-term effects, which is better, and I don't accept this argument that it's not traceable underground. I think modern technology is telling us that it is. I always feel when the use of on-board plan order, when it comes to projects like this, and local authorities don't get an input into this, it's bypassing a lot of expert knowledge and people that have good knowledge on the ground. I just always feel that's a bit of a... I wanted to ask about the use of the environmental impact statements, which are used in most projects and would certainly would give a picture of the whole effects that we'd have on the environment and everything. And I just feel that's an area that's very important. The European Landscape Convention was mentioned, and we haven't signed up to it from what people are saying. And that, to me, obviously, is something that needs to be looked at, because I do think that the visual impact of these structures is massive, and the effects on the communities, and maybe people have some suggestions that we would work on that. EMF emissions, I think one expert will say it has effect, others will say not. I've dealt with this, I've done it many times at different things, and some evidence is suggesting it have effect on younger children, particularly babies, etc. Some evidence is on that, because we could bring in expert after expert and one will contradict the other, etc. So I think it's an area we have to be careful when we're dealing with that. I think when it comes to EirGrid, I don't know whether they have looked at the whole issue of the use of the roads, the paths, the rail lines, the undergrounding along carriageways, etc. In terms of, have they given us a proper study to say that these are areas we should be looking at. I want to also ask about people who signed up to some of these deals, because I was listening to a programme where they were talking about they were conned into signing up, the knowledge. Maybe someone can fill me in whether this has happened on a scale in terms of for future works. And some of these have, from what I can gather, are not even going to be along these routes. So maybe someone can tell me something on that. And in terms of compulsory purchase, I know that's a very contentious issue. And are people making concerns in regards to this? I've heard the issue of the consultation process, and it does seem that there's a lot more to be done in that area, because it's obvious that there are other countries like France and Spain that have looked at undergrounding, and maybe we can put more pressure on and see, can we find out what has happened in regards to looking at other countries. And just in regards to the committee, I'm on the committee, and my concern, and probably a lot of the committee concerns, was there's a lot of submissions have to be put in by the 26th, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted to get people in to hear their views before. There's no point in getting EirGrid in and then the consultation period is gone. So I think that was one of the reasons why you wanted to hear from people. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Now I'll go to Deputy McEntee.
Thank you. Firstly, can I just thank the individual groups for coming in, and to thank them for their presentations. I think, as Deputy Coffey said, it's important that everybody has their say. I think until recently this issue has really only affected Meath and Cavan Monaghan. I'm obviously from County Meath, and although I'm only recently elected, it's something that my father's worked on. So I do think it's an issue now that's suddenly been put into the public sphere, possibly a bit more. I think the biggest barrier really to our grid expansion is public acceptance, and I think it's fairly clear from the groups here today, from the meetings, from the protests that have happened, that we really don't have public acceptance. And I think possibly this has stemmed from EirGrid's consultation or lack thereof. I think anybody who's been involved in it for the past number of years could have guessed what was going to be said today, and I suppose in a sense I'm kind of disappointed because I would have hoped that there could have been some change with the newer groups, but unfortunately I think the process is happening the same as it did 6 years ago with the other groups. I don't like to hear now that people are possibly saying that public representation is failing them. I think a lot of work has gone into this in the past 6 years, and we've seen the fact that nothing has gone overhead or underground in the Meath to Tyrone interconnector, but unfortunately it is costing the state 30 million in a year, and that's for 140 kilometres. We're obviously looking at a larger grid, which is 800 kilometres, so I think it needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. Obviously, we have Airgrid in 2 weeks, and I think every member of this committee will be expecting answers, and I would hope the questions will be put to them before they actually come in so that we can actually have answers for them. Really, I don't have any questions because I think you've answered a lot of them. I think an independent cost analysis needs to be done. My own local group, NEPP, have said that it is in the public domain. It costs 2.3 million to go overhead per kilometre and 2 million underhead. Now, I understand that doesn't include converter stations, so I think this needs to be looked at, and a cost analysis does actually need to happen, because as a committee I can't comment on health issues. I don't think I would be qualified to, but as a committee we can look at the cost, how much this is costing the taxpayer, and as he said, NEPP, or not NEPP, the Airgrid have not agreed with the lot of the Commission, but possibly conveniently they have agreed that the costing is 3 times the amount, whereas before it was 20 and 15, and we really do need to find out once and for all how much it actually will cost to go underground. So I don't really have any questions.
I noticed that there's a vote in the Senate. Senator Landy was next to come in, so I'll let you in straight away.
Thank you, I'll be very brief, and I'd like to thank everybody for attending. I'd just like to make a couple of points, and my points are in order to evoke some responses from yourselves so that we can use when Airgrid come in here. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions. You'll have to forgive me if I have to leave, but once you put the answers on the record, I will be able to get them. The first question is in relation to public consultation. The question is basically that the current system that's in place, can you explain to the committee why you believe it's flawed, and what system of consultation that you want to see in place put in by Airgrid in order to have a proper consultation? And on that, there's an office in my own town of Carrickshire. They sit there for 6 hours once a week on a Tuesday. People have gone in there and asked them questions. There's 2 staff there. One staff was in attendance. They went back a number of hours later, and the other member of the staff was in attendance from Airgrid. They got directly opposite answers to the same questions. So that's just an example of what's going on. I'd also like to ask in relation to the whole issue of the European Landscape Convention, Alina specifically, because that's the area you dealt with. Do you believe that Airgrid have breached that convention, and do you believe that the process is flawed as a result of that? The next question I'd like to ask is in relation to, Owen, you made reference to a European funding that was applied to by Airgrid in relation to other routes. Can you clarify for the committee, are there other routes other than the one that you have mentioned? Because I have evidence to the effect that there are other routes applied for across this country by Airgrid to Europe for funding. I need clarity on that as well. I'd also just like to ask the question in relation to consultation. Would your groups be agreeable if this committee could convince Airgrid to meet a representative group of each of your committees to discuss your concerns about consultation, the lack of it and the way it should move forward? And finally, in relation to the process as it is now and the selection of corridors, could I ask you, Pete, in relation to the village that you come from, my own village of Faheen, because it's less than 1,000 people in population that has been disregarded and is actually subsumed by the corridor, how far down do you believe that the cognizance should be taken of population density vis-à-vis villages, etc.? And the very last point I'd make, Chairman, and I thank you for your indulgence, is that I'd like to put on the record that Airgrid are using surveys and analysis that were done in 2008 to stand up their arguments. Even the one that was done by the expert group is now outdated. There is ongoing research in both Germany and Denmark in relation to the most recent technological ability and capabilities of undergrounding cables, and is the committee aware of that, and can you give us some information on it? Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, thank you. Could I ask for comments on those last three of the members as quickly as you can? Who would like to come in? Sorry, Owen. All right, Cian.
Just briefly, Deputy McEntee, in relation to the public representatives failing us, we understand, at least in our area, that local representatives, in terms of county councillors and town councillors, were consulted by EirGrid and had meetings, and they didn't see fit to inform the public in a similar fashion as EirGrid. It was only when we raised the issue and called public meetings, and then the local representatives, or some of the local representatives, were happy to attend, that it emerged that they had had meetings with EirGrid. But only then did we realise that there's an onus on you collectively and individually now to represent the people who've elected you, and we call on you to do that. There's a huge disparity in weighting between the groups here in terms of the finance and the weight behind EirGrid promoting their agenda, and the community groups on the other side, and we need your help on that. In terms of the quotes of 2.2 million versus 2 million that you quoted, they don't take any regard for the other effects to the communities in relation to tourism and devaluation and so on and so forth. So if they are included in a full cost benefit analysis, then the benefits of undergrounding as opposed to overgrounding will be much greater.
Okay, John.
Yeah, just in terms of public consultation, I think we've outlined clearly that the public consultation thus far has been flawed, so it should be asked to stop the projects from proceeding. The group should then be asked to participate in terms of reference of public consultation. What should that public consultation actually entail? It's not for us as simple citizens to tell EirGrid as a semi-state body how they should conduct their business. The government should assist in that manner. We're quite happy to agree terms of reference of public consultation, and once those terms of reference and then the issues associated with public consultation are agreed, then the consultation process can start. But fundamentally, the existing process is flawed, and it has to stop immediately, and a new format agreed. I mean, Cian mentioned that the councillors were all aware of these projects. EirGrid have said that. EirGrid have told us, and it's written in their documentation, that councillors, TDs and senators were all issued with a documentation pack at stage 1, stage 2 and stage 3 of this process. So that's everybody in this room effectively. So it's only when the public bring these matters to the attention of the elected representatives that their ears prick up and they start to get interested, because the electorate then bring these issues to you. You don't bring them to the electorate. So I'd be interested to hear what the committee has to say about the packs, the documentation packs that they received. And I'd like to ask this committee, are they submitting a submission on behalf of this committee to EirGrid on the basis of what they've heard today by the 26th of November?
All of those issues, obviously, all of those issues will be considered after we...
So is that a yes or a no?
Well, I cannot speak for the committee because it's discussed by the committee afterwards.
Can we see a show of hands?
No, sorry, just hold on a second. Just hold on a second now. There's a process involved here. All of the considerations will be taken and will be discussed at next week at private session by the committee.
We do simply make a submission before next Tuesday.
Yeah, well, we can discuss it. We can go into private session afterwards and do it. But there's we have to respect the procedures that are there. I don't want to. I have tried today not to in any way restrict any debate here, but I think we have to also respect the processes and the role that we play, and that's what we do.
The submission, the deadline for some, just be clear about it, the deadline for submission date is the 26th of November, which is next Tuesday, so we would like to hear your response to that, possibly by tomorrow or Friday.
Yeah, as I said, we'll discuss these matters afterwards.
Sorry, point of order. What was the problem with the process of a member proposing what this man suggested and another member seconding it? Is there a problem there?
No. The reality here is that the committee, in the way the committees have been formed, and we don't make any decisions in public session. We invite people in, and the reason, as I think Deputy Ellis pointed out, the reason that we invited in the community groups today was to do it in advance of the 26th. So it was with that in mind. But what we have to do to fulfil our role here is that we have to consider the presentations that have been made here today, to inform us for future meetings with other stakeholders, and also we will consider in private session all the issues that have been raised, including the issue of the submission. Sorry?
Can I make a point, please, about the public consultation process? I actually was speaking to somebody in the zone in Great Island, and they're living very, very close to the station in Great Island just last week, and they didn't know that this was happening. They actually didn't know about it. There are several people in our local area, and they're only hearing about this now, and the deadline is next Tuesday at 5 o'clock. And we have found it extremely difficult to get information from EirGrid. For example, their stage 1 report, we were weeks waiting on it. Then they were to send us out their constraints report. We had to wait weeks on that. Eventually we got it this week, and the deadline is next Tuesday. So I think that the consultation process is seriously flawed.
Can I make a proposal, Chair, that we just continue with the Oireachtas members making their presentations and putting questions to our witnesses, and then the committee can obviously then, in its own right, can discuss what they want to do next in terms of if they want to make a submission. But I think there's Oireachtas members who are waiting to come in. So if we start making decisions now before we even finish all of the questions, I think that would be
what I want, and there are other members waiting to come in here, and I want to go through that process.
There's a few points to be answered.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to address the question about compliance with the European Landscape Convention. It's really for the Irish Government to comply with the European Landscape Convention. You know, when they signed that convention in 2002, they undertook to plan, manage and protect the landscapes of Ireland, hand in hand with the communities that inhabit those landscapes. But in particular, they need to recognise that those landscapes have value. Even the less dramatic landscapes of Ireland have value, and they need to recognise that in law. And the fact that 11 and a half years later, we still don't have a landscape strategy for Ireland, it's just mind-boggling when you think about this country with its stunning landscapes and how important that is to our creativity as a nation, our national identity, and to our tourism industry, which is a bedrock of a sustainable economy in rural Ireland. I don't know if EirGrid can breach the European Landscape Convention, but certainly the situation that they have had to deal with in terms of Irish Government's landscape policy has meant that when they get to An Bord Pleanála, I think they're on very, very shaky ground in terms of how they've treated the Irish landscape in this process. As an example, and I'm from South County Carlow, but you know, in the absence of a landscape designation from Carlow County Council, and EirGrid recognised the lack of consistency in landscape mapping as a data challenge, and it's in their Stage 1 report. It's a known problem, and it has been a known problem. You know, their reports from 2007, a Mozart report that was prepared for An Bord Fáilte about this lack of consistency in landscape mapping from local authority to local authority. So in addressing this data challenge, EirGrid took it upon themselves to make a value judgment on the landscapes in County Carlow, and they put in a constraint which is called undesignated landscape. And this just completely flies in the face of the European Landscape Convention, because the community have to be involved in identifying landscapes of value. It can't be done from a desk or using a computer program, because landscapes have value on so many different levels. They have value, historical value, aesthetic value, cultural value, amenity value. And it's only the people who inhabit and use those landscapes that can assign that value. So, yeah, I think in County Carlow's case, the fact that EirGrid took it upon themselves to assign landscape value without consultation, either with the local authority or the local community, is a significant shortcoming. Yeah, so look, I believe that if EirGrid pursue this project in its current form, I think that it will be challengeable. I think on Board Planola, you know, have to refer to EU legislation, and in the absence of an Irish landscape strategy, you know, it's blown right open. And you know, we're galvanising support. We've been raising money locally, and if we need to take this to Europe, we will. Absolutely, we will take it to Europe.
Yeah, just in relation to, and I'm not aware, I don't have the answer, but I'm not, the status of a convention, I'm not sure as against legislation. So that's something obviously we'll have to get clarified. In other words, is a convention binding or whatever? Maybe you know the answer, but I certainly don't.
I mean, I think that I would ask the committee to just investigate this and maybe get a legal opinion on it.
Yeah, obviously we'll look into that. Now, could I? Sorry, just. Nigel.
I just want to respond to Deputy Helen McEntee when she mentioned that every year the North-South interconnector is not built. It's a cost of 30 million. Those figures have been bandied about of 25 to 30 million, and have been answered in parliamentary questions that this is costing the consumer that amount of money. That's not true. What that study actually stated was that there could possibly be 25 to 30 million saving, which would accrue, which would be a benefit that it would accrue to the wholesale market. Now, how much of that would actually be passed back to the consumer is anybody's guess. At this moment in time, EirGrid are saying that the operation of the East-West interconnector has resulted in a saving of 7% to the wholesale market. Well, I don't see my electricity bill being decreased by 7%. In fact, it's going up. With regard to this gentleman here, he asked about latest technology and he mentioned Germany. Well, in Germany, there's a massive discussion going on at the moment to roll out a new grid of thousands and thousands of kilometres. And the TSOs, there's 3 or 4 TSOs in Germany, and between them they are proposing that more than half of that grid will be built using HVDC technology, either overhead, both overhead and underground, because, I'm quoting directly, it is the best and most cost-efficient method of transferring power over long distances.
Peter?
Yes, the Senator asked a specific question about mapping and population, about the constraint of 1,000 people in a population. That's, I mean, the EirGrid have to use that as a constraint, but they don't take into account smaller villages. If you try and look for the population of a village like Forheen, I had to ask around. Either that or sort of do a head count, because it's not listed by the county council, and this feeds into the differences between county councils and their development plans and the mapping process that they have. As a result, it's a common problem. The next village along from us has the very same problem. It's going within 100 and 150 metres of a national school and an old folks' home. So it's a common problem. They barely even see a speck on a map, because 1,000 isn't a constraint. They aren't required to worry about that. They just think it's open countryside. They haven't bothered to look, as far as we can see. So they should be required. We are, as far as we're aware, listed as a village within a county development plan. So they could have looked there.
Chairman,
Okay, Deputy
Can I just refer back just briefly to the 30 million when I said the 30 million, I meant it in a negative light, that either way, what does or doesn't go back to the public, it's not good. And either way, I didn't mean that it's costing 30 million not going overhead. I meant we need to sort this out now, because it is affecting the public and it is affecting the taxpayers' money.
Just in regards to an environmental impact statement, I didn't hear anyone say anything in relation to that. Maybe someone could.
Chairman, I'll say something about it, but there was a question directed to me specifically, and that was, no, I'm not aware of any additional projects applied for funding that are of high voltage. I'm aware of all the Grid 25 projects, and then this one that we discovered last month, when the most up-to-date European list. I'm not aware of any more that are there, but if there is, we'd be delighted to hear of them, naturally enough. Two other comments on the environmental impact statement. Environmental impact statements are something that EirGrid have to do by law. The board will primarily decide, they'll screen it, and they'll basically say what issues need to be looked at and need to be examined. That process is going on at the minute, even with our project, and the board has to make a decision on the screening by the 21st of December. Yet we believe that the environmental impact statement is already concluded and finished. So there's whole questions and serious question marks there. As regards the environmental impact statement, my views on it are this: when you pay a consultant to do a job, they'll do the job to suit those who are paying, and that comes back then to local communities to try and oppose that environmental impact statement. But local communities never get the opportunity, or don't have the opportunity of the same level playing field, because you've got a very short window of opportunity after the planning application is lodged. That's only when you see the environmental impact statement, when the planning application has been lodged. You've got 6 weeks maybe at that stage to put in your submission. They are working at this project with us for 6 years, that they say, and probably for 10 years. So I don't have an awful lot to say about the EIS. It's in law. It's been updated. What has to be included in them is going to be changed at European level very shortly. And whether that will be in best interest of local communities, I think it will, but we'll wait and see. And the final point, just as regards this public acceptance and the public consultation and what would be acceptable to communities. The system is flawed. The reason the system is flawed is that the public no longer have any confidence in EirGrid, because they're not getting answers. They're not being provided with the information. They have to drag it out of them screaming. If you don't have public confidence in a process, you will never have public acceptance. So the challenge for legislators and EirGrid is to gain public confidence. The government's policy documents actually states that the fundamental part of the development of these energy projects is community acceptability. We're further away from community acceptability now than we were in 2010, further away. We're going in the opposite direction.
So what's your view on how it should happen? On how the consultation should happen? Just your own personal view.
We've had this discussion on numerous occasions with EirGrid as to how best consultation should happen. And I think I touched on it earlier on. To me, consultation is about people sitting down with no set agenda. There is a project that somebody wants to bring, and everything should be put out in the open, and it's up to the promoter to put it out up in the open. The fors and against, the positives and negatives, nothing to be hidden. If communities then have got issues with that, those issues, not only must the community get an opportunity to air them, but there must be a process that is actually seen to deal with them. And we don't have that process to deal with them. Anybody who wants to go on the EirGrid website and see the final solution report proposed for the North-South interconnector will actually see the community's issues are listed in an appendix. But no effort of any kind has been made to take those issues on board. It's EirGrid's way or no way.
Okay, thank you. Could I, now we have, I think, 6 people offering, so we'll take the first 3, which is Deputy Humphreys, Senator Cullinan and Deputy Tobin, and then we have Deputy Deering, Deputy Timmins, I'm not sure, Deputy Healy has left, so...
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, you didn't indicate, okay.
Yeah. And I'll be gone at that stage because order of business is on and I've got to contribute. But anyway.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I want to thank all of the groups for coming in here and giving their presentations. I want to particularly thank the group from Monaghan because obviously this has been an ongoing problem in Monaghan for many years now. I think the big issue here today is that EirGrid are not taking on the views of the public. They're not carrying out the proper consultation. It's you know, in terms of health, visual impact, property devaluation, the public's views are not being listened to. And you know, it's been a long process in Monaghan with EirGrid to date, as I said. And just to cut straight to the chase here, is there any scope at all for some sort of agreement with EirGrid on the North-South interconnector? That's my question.
Okay, Deputy, Senator Cullinan.
Yeah, I just want to first of all welcome all of the groups. I'm from Waterford, so I'm directly affected by this issue myself, and I'm standing with all of those communities and people like yourselves who are quite rightly concerned about this project. There's been a lot of discussion so far, and Dennis Landy asked Owen about the consultation process and what's his view of consultation. I think we have to inject some sense of reality into this whole discussion, because from my perspective, the consultation process is flawed and will continue to be flawed for 2 main reasons. The first reason is because the planning application from EirGrid, whether it's a North-South interconnector, and when they eventually get to it, if they get to it in the GridLink project, will go straight to Bord Pleanála. And it bypasses the normal planning process, and that creates problems first and foremost. But the second problem with the consultation process is that it's flawed because national policy doesn't have a hierarchy in terms of how we deal with these issues. So, for example, we don't have a preference as a state on whether we support overground versus underground or underground versus overground. And that's the main problem, that's the big problem that we have. And I think what we should be doing as legislators is facing up to our responsibilities. Do we have a responsibility to legislate? EirGrid can hide behind government policy, can hide behind the fact that we don't have a hierarchy of policy and our preferences in this area. But we have a job to do, and I think we need to focus on that. There is, in my view, a lot of politicians from across all the parties, both in government and opposition, both at Oireachtas and at local level, who are very rightly concerned about the projects from health perspectives, and I know there's conflicting views on that, but certainly from the impact on landscape and the valuation of land and all of that. If we want to resolve this issue, we can legislate and we can change the parameters in terms of how the planning process is set out, and also to put in place a hierarchy of the process that's used. And I obviously would support underground. Deputy Coffey made a very interesting proposal from the southeast and the Leinster perspective, which is, why don't we use the motorway? We have the main Waterford to Cork Road. We have a motorway that goes straight from Waterford to Dublin. We have already cables, you know, along some of those routes. Why can't we do this? That's our job. That's what we should be focused on. And maybe I would just like to hear the views from our witnesses and the campaign groups have come in, because I think if we don't deal with this issue, we're going to continue to focus on the failures of the consultation process, which are obvious, and we're not dealing with the elephant in the room, that in my view, as legislators, we have failed in our responsibility to have a joined-up policy and to do what other countries like Denmark have done, which is to say our preference is for underground. And if we were to do that, then I think the game would change. And my advice to all of the campaigning groups is that our main priority should be to delay this as much as we possibly can, because technology is changing all of the time. I remember in 2007, EirGrid saying that it wasn't possible to go underground. They were saying that it was 21 times more costly. Now they have to accept it's 3.5 times more costly, but that's only the initial investment, the capital investment. They're not looking at the long-term savings of energy that's lost with the overground So I think we need to push for the cost-benefit analysis that should be done on the underground versus overground. It should be independent, and it should be over a 40 or 50-year lifespan. We should delay this as best we can, using every possible avenue open to us, because I believe the technology is changing in our favour in terms of those of us who support the underground option. But the main point I want to make is that we, as legislators, have to face up to our responsibilities, and we haven't done that up to now, in my view.
Okay, Deputy Toby.
Gur mágad a caithfidh agus gur mágad Steve as Chacun and you. I'm a TD for County Meath, and we've been dealing with this issue ourselves for the last 6 to 7 years. And I've no doubt that there needs to be structural improvements within the grid, and I've no doubt that there needs to be an all-Ireland energy market as such. But no project can go ahead in this state against the will of the people, and that needs to be the basis on which we discuss all of these issues. One of the major points is with regards to costs, and I would make the point that every year that it's not undergrounded costs the taxpayer 30 million euros. And if you look at it over the last 6 to 7 years, that's 210 million euros. The current government policy has cost the actual taxpayer itself. And even the way EirGrid treated the onboard Planola application on the last occasion where its application collapsed, and because of its information not being correct, there was a cost to the state for that amount, and there was no accountability there at all. NEPP had to pay the majority of the amount of money for its engagement with onboard Planola, while the taxpayer had to foot the bill for the mistakes on EirGrid in that regards. It was made a point that energy needs to be left behind in Meath. We wouldn't have the necessary energy for the likes of an Intel. But the North-South interconnector is not going to leave any energy behind, or access to energy behind, for the whole of County Meath. Right up to the end of point, no community will be able to access the necessary energy there to develop its industry. And also, as I said earlier, EirGrid have said that government policy changes, it will underground. EirGrid is not an independent fiefdom. It operates according to the law, and if the law changes, which this Oireachtas can decide, it will then have to proceed as such. One of the key elements I know that the campaign in Meath have been doing very successfully is that they've managed to get 90% of the landowners to refuse to give EirGrid access, and it's that level of community unity, if you like, has been one of the key success factors of that particular campaign. One of the questions I would have, you mentioned, I think, Mr. McCusker, that tens of thousands possibly. Has there been any estimate with regards the actual catchment of people? How many people roughly are being affected by these proposed lines? And also, Mr. Bannigan mentioned that he had experienced box ticking exercises so far, and I would hate for this to become another box taking exercise. And a deputy behind me, who's not here, I think at the moment, did mention that this is the start of the process. This is not the start of the process. This is nearly the end of the process for many communities here who are 6 and 7 years into this. So, I would like to see, and I would like to ask the Carrier, would it be possible for this committee to, first of all, make that submission as is requested in time, but also carry a motion of the committee that the committee seeks for these to be undergrounded, and that the motion calls on, or that the committee calls on the government to create legislation for it to be undergrounded. My office is at the moment is preparing legislation for undergrounding, and we hope to have it published in the new years. And I'd love if some of your community organisations could help my office in that.
Thank you. Do you want to?
Yeah, just to go back on the question of the amount of families, young families, that are affected by the overhead lines, and their homes, and the valuation, and their mortgages, and the negative equity that they already have, I'm sure, and how that all would be exacerbated. These questions have been put to EirGrid. They have not come back with any answers. Maybe they're not willing to do the study. Maybe they know the answer, but they're not just telling us. We don't know, but we've asked the question. And that's just one simple issue that everybody knows about. I mean, it's not a magic scientific item that needs a huge committee to discuss. It's just one issue. It's one issue of a number of items that, again, we've identified that needs to be undertaken by EirGrid or maybe another authority to look at the whole cost-benefit analysis. Maybe EirGrid don't have the competence to do it. Maybe that's why it's not been done. So this committee maybe needs to challenge that. And if EirGrid don't have the competence to do it, then maybe another authority should actually do it for them.
Okay.
There was a question specific on the North-South interconnector, and I think it was, is there any scope for agreement on North-South? I am an optimist, and of course there is scope for agreement. Can I outline to it how that might be possible here today? No, I can't. But what I can say is that County Monaghan Anti-Pylon Committee has invited Mr. Sly to come down to meet with the County Monaghan Anti-Pylon group in County Monaghan. That offer has been refused. For whatever reasons, you need to ask EirGrid that. The only way that there's going to be progress on North-South by bringing communities along is that if the community's concerns are addressed. And to date, after 6 years, the community's concerns have not been addressed. It would be very simple for me to say that yes, on the ground, the North-South interconnector, and it'll go ahead tomorrow morning. That's the truth of what would happen. That is the truth. That's what the landowners and local communities want to see happening. The government commissioned an independent study. That independent study on the North-South interconnector said the technology is there, it can be done, and it can be done successfully. So there is scope for agreement, but not the way things are going on at the minute. Just one point, and this is general, I think it was Mr. Cullinan said it. There is no planning guideline specifically to deal with power lines. There is dealing with wind, there is with roads, there is whatever. And being honest about it, EirGrid probably didn't want to see any specific planning guidelines for power lines until they got Grid 25 completed. And then it'd be like bolting the stable door when the horse was gone. We put them in place. That's a starting point that this committee could maybe start working on. What we need to address if we want to go down this line. And it takes in overgrounding and undergrounding. It takes in distances from homes, it takes in distance valuation of property. But it's a major task, and it's not one that will be done before next January or February, when we might be facing a new planning application. Those things should be done first.
Okay.
Senator Cullinan said, I think correctly, he encouraged the groups to go down every possible avenue to oppose the overhead lines. I just want to make it, well, I presume he meant go down every possible legal avenue to oppose the overhead lines, because there's no way we're going to be going down any other avenue. I want to make that clear.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. Now we have Deputy Deering, followed by Deputy Timmins.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, as another member, just going to be delighted to get the opportunity to a few words on this particular issue. Coming from the part of the country, I come from County Carlow, and probably more affected than anybody else. There are 4 potential corridors going through County Carlow, being the second smallest county in the country, and one would have to wonder how that came about. And I'd like to compliment, first of all, Helena on her initiative and her leadership in this particular matter, being the first group in the county out of the stalls in this area. And there's no doubt we've heard a lot about the consultation or lack of consultation, since that seems to be the main problem here at the moment. I totally agree with that. About a year and a half ago, I suppose, this process started with EirGrid in our area, and lack of information is an understatement. But because, and I will be a cynic now in this regard, they have 4 potential corridors identified now at the moment, but I would be of the opinion that they have a line or a corridor actually picked at the moment without actually telling people. And they have a divide and conquer policy whereby they have 4 corridors now at the moment. In our case, the whole country or the whole county is up in arms, and rightly so. But human nature being what it is, and this is the unfortunate tragedy in the whole matter. Human nature being what it is, when a corridor is actually picked, probably 3/4 of the people will be happy and say, thank God it's not in my backyard. But there will be 25% of the people very, very unhappy in the matter. And the problem arose, and I think Mr McCusker made a point about the fact that public representatives weren't made aware and got packs and so on and so forth. Maybe so, but, and I did likewise, but there was absolutely no interest in the matter. But there was no interest in the matter because people weren't aware exactly where a line or corridor was going to be. And it's only in the last 4 or 5 weeks, when the actual corridors are put on a map, the people have stood up and took notice of the matter. And that's probably the breakdown in the whole area. We need, in my opinion at the moment, because there is a lack of information, a vacuum has been created. In order to fill that vacuum, I suppose there's nobody here, in my opinion. There's probably some of us more informed than others, in particular the Monaghan people who are more on the road longer than some more of us. But I think to fill that vacuum, information has to be got, proper independent information has to be got from appropriate sources. And I think that a solution needs to be found as well. In order to do that, in my opinion, is that the only way a solution can be found is if an independent